I am delighted to have an opportunity to welcome a couple of guests to deliver a report with me about transitioning nonprofit funding decisions. So we are joined today by a few members of a pretty extraordinary team that has been generously giving of its time for the past more than 18 months at this point. Before I launch into a presentation, I just want to do a quick round of introduction. We have with us Cicely Whitfield, Gita Stevenezer, Saul Reyes, and of course our beloved Samia Bird, our Chief Race and Equity Officer for the county, as well as I think we've got Devanshi Patel on the phone. Is that right? Who I think maybe driving through Danville, thus is her commitment.
That's correct. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Devanshi. I'm really grateful to these folks. As you'll see as I share a little more about today's presentation, the time commitment, benefit of the doubt, and so many other things that they have extended to me personally and to us as county government in trying to rethink a pretty fundamental way of doing business here, which is to say the way that the county board makes decisions around nonprofit funding, and seeking to reform that to really reflect our goals of racial equity, of listening to our communities, and to trusting our communities, particularly our communities of color, when it comes to defining the needs and coming up with solutions to meet those needs. So I'm going to launch in with just a little bit of an overview of our project. The exciting thing to be presented today is that this team has really helped work closely with government, particularly me as a representative of this board, Samia as a representative of the county manager's office, and others, to co-create a set of principles for how funding can move forward in a way that really does reflect our values of racial equity and community partnership. So just to launch in with our first slide here, what is this project? So as I indicated before, this was about bringing together BIPOC voices in our community, and particularly community leaders like the ones that we have today who have, I think fair to say, deep credibility among our community members, or among our community members in our Black and Latinx communities in particular, to take on this question of how Arlington has made community and human services funding decisions, and particularly how this board has made community and human services funding decisions, which is to say, in somewhat of a, at best, ad hoc way, year after year with the budget, in a way that really didn't live up to our values of transparency and access. One of the things we spent a lot of time talking about was a theme that was really echoed by the 2021 Dialogues in Race and Equity that Simi and her team worked on with Challenging Racism, where we heard some very truthful feedback about how the Arlington way, for the many things it's achieved and in its times positive reputation in the community, also has some real downsides. That it has been a system or way of doing things that has lacked transparency and access, that has prioritized relationships over fairness at times. One of the things we heard often in the DRE is that it feels like it is part of or reflective of predetermined outcomes, and people feel inauthentically engaged. And above all, what we've heard from our community leaders group, as well as from the Dialogues in Race and Equity, is that the Arlington way has historically disadvantaged BIPOC community members and organizations. So our goal in rethinking how Arlington, and particularly the Arlington County Board, can think about awarding community and human services funding was not just to change that, but also to confront some of those challenges with the Arlington way, baked into how we do processes like the one to rethink funding here. The goal was, in addition to try to develop new ways of making funding decisions that would be more transparent, accessible, and racially equitable. And the group that came together to do this included a number of BIPOC community leaders, again, representatives of some community-based service providers who really sought to bring in those who maybe had led grassroots, truly community-based nonprofits. As well as representatives of Arlington County government, as I mentioned. We were supported by the E Pluribus Unum Fellowship, which is a national fellowship working to support local governments in the South working on issues of race and equity, particularly systemic race and equity. And through their generosity, we're able to bring in external subject matter experts and facilitators. We partnered closely with the United Way of the National Capital Area. We were also able to draw on experts, from example, from Denver, who had worked on nonprofit funding and funding for equity as well. So I'm going to share just a quick timeline about our project and then invite colleagues to add any comments about the project timeline as it unfolded. And then I'm going to turn it over to the group to talk about the recommendations that have come out of these deliberations, and then I'll close with a few next steps. So this is sort of a recap. We initially convened, having some exploratory conversations, knowing that there was a need to change how we did nonprofit funding, and then designing a project that I worked on and then sought funding for to try to do a needs assessment to say, how do we better hear from members of our community about what they need, and then amend our nonprofit funding practices to try to better meet those needs. We brought together a group of leaders with the intention of engaging in sort of a snowball effort, talking to folks and then asking them to refer to more folks in the community and so on. And then we learned a lot as we convened folks. I think what we heard, well, I know what we heard, was that the way the project had been designed was perpetuating a lot of the very power dynamics we were trying to disrupt. This idea that someone had decided there needed to be a needs assessment, when in fact there was a pretty good sense of what the needs were in the community if county government was willing to listen to leaders. And we also got the feedback that I think was really fair and authentic, which is that community leaders, particularly from our BIPOC communities, have been asked often to leverage their relationships to serve as a bridge to the community without any guarantee that what they were bringing back to county government was actually being heard or asked about. So we paused, we tried to reset and to really rethink what would look like a truly co-created and truly respectful form of engagement. So if we go to the next phase, our phase 2, our reset, we redefined the scope of the project. We talked about how would we design a project from the start, not to do a needs assessment, but to acknowledge the knowledge that was already in the room. And one of the biggest takeaways was we flipped the way we thought about it. Instead of trying to go and talk to the community about needs and then make change, was that we needed to show as county government that we were capable of making some change and using that as a basis to then try to go to the community and engage more wider voices in the ongoing calculation and evaluation of whether our programs are doing what they say they can do. So the big result here, as I mentioned, is the set of recommendations about how we make changes of county awarded funding. You'll hear from our community leaders. There are a fair number of ideas about community voice in doing that and making those allocations. But I also just want to pause and acknowledge that this is in many ways step one for us. We are trying to repair a lot of historic distrust and a sense that communities have been taken for granted or even taken advantage of by county government. And so the broader work of continuing to really engage the wider community to show that we're willing to share power and improve things and make some of these systemic changes, this is only the tip of the iceberg. So before I hand things over to the team to start presenting some of the recommendations in specific, what do you think, you all? What have I missed? Is there anything that you would add about kind of how that process unfolded and what we learned from it? So I'm not just putting words in everyone's mouth.
Okay. No, I don't think you put any words in our mouths. I think this was a learning process for all of us. And we, as a group, I believe we can all kind of say that we're thankful for the opportunity to engage on this work for the last 18 months to really see some effective change start here in Arlington.
Thank you.
You have anything?
I said it will be a change because the process already changed us to be here. So I hope it will be changed. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
And I'll just add that it's been a pleasure to take part of this process in redefining the awards and funding process in Arlington. We all know that Arlington values diversity and inclusiveness. And I just think that this is a way to make Arlington more transparent, racially equitable, and accessible for all. And so it's been 18 months, and it's been a great experience. And so looking forward to sharing our recommendations.
Well, thank you all so much. So without further ado, I'm actually going to do exactly that. So if you scroll through, you can see this is a quick summary of 4 different areas. We've thought about them as steps for the way that funding should flow in Arlington. And without further ado, Cicely and Kiedis, I'm going to turn it to you to talk a little bit about step 1, which is to say the call for proposals.
All right. So the moment we've all been waiting for. So for step 1, it was a call for proposals. And we just had some very kind of clear recommendations for this step. So it was to have a clear and competitive, transparent process for a NOFA, or Notice of Funding Availability, for community services is recommended. It was also there that we said that defining community service would look like illustrations and examples, but not restrictive of certain categories, restrictive to what we just currently do. We wanted it to be an opportunity for defining community services as something that's being proactive instead of reactive. So us seeing things on the front lines and being able to serve in those areas without being restricted to what some things are currently set up as. Kiedis, do you want to do the other ones?
No, that's fine. Go ahead.
Okay. So then we also had technical assistance sessions where the county would have technical assistance sessions for folks going after these NOFAs. This part was very important to us, particularly for smaller organizations who don't necessarily have the bandwidth or the knowledge in the grant making cycle that other larger organizations have. So we wanted to make sure that providing technical assistance from the county's side would be accessible to all, making it an accessible NOFA. We also wanted to make sure that we had transparent deadlines and requests for follow-up of information. We wanted to make sure that having a deadline, especially for smaller nonprofits, is kind of hard when it's only just you or somebody else in the office. So really kind of being flexible enough with the deadline that we can respond accordingly, but also when we have requests to follow up for information that is not us having to hurry to do something, then not give a concise or clear answer because we don't have the bandwidth to do so. But we also wanted to make sure that in those requests, what did I miss? That the timelines for organizations to access funding disbursements would be understood in those requests as well. I think that's it. Do you have number 2?
Great, thank you. And so I think we can keep going. Over to you, evaluation.
All right, that's my cue. The next step, as you see there on the PowerPoint, is evaluating proposals. So bear with me on this one, it's a little long. So our recommendations are the following. First, that proposals should be evaluated holistically. For example, not divided into service areas based on organizations' ability to meet community needs, and multi-domain projects are welcome. The evaluation criteria for NOFAs should include a stated preference for organizations led by and serving communities of color and other marginalized communities. And there should be consideration made for organizations that are smaller and more grassroots in nature, especially those that are led by and serving marginalized communities. And to reflect trust in community-based organizations and to understand their communities, the county government should not define the needs or service areas. And what we mean by this is that organizations are invited to define the need they see in the community and describe how they can use county funding to meet that need. The proposals should be evaluated by a panel of consisting of subject matter experts, community members who are eligible for and or receive services, the voices of community members who will be impacted by the NOFA should be included on the evaluation panels where feasible and appropriate. And all members of the evaluation panels, including staff working on matters related to the evaluation, will be trained on the same principles of equitable evaluation and racial equity, social justice. And this leads me to the fourth point. Evaluation criteria should explicitly include racial equity and social justice, and should also demonstrate the quality of narratives about how organizations and proposals reflect the value of closeness to the community. Now, this is not a rubric. It's not a rubric. Organizations need to provide the details that matter most to them and the community they serve, which could include lived experiences of organizations, leadership, staff, and boards, examples of hiring members of community they serve, including youth. Lastly, joint ventures with larger community-based organizations are encouraged. Though, if such organizations can demonstrate how the joint venture is a partnership relationship and not a subcontractor arrangement with the smaller organization. That concludes this step for me, and I'll pass it over to Devanshi, who's joining us by phone, to talk about the awards process. So Devanshi.
Devanshi, we were going to check and see if you wanted to do the step 3. If not, I think Sol's teed up to take it for you. Takes a village, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes someone's behind the wheel.
All right, so then I'll talk about the awards process. The recommendations are that there should be transparency. County government should make public lists of current and previous grantees. For organizations that do not receive funding, county government should provide individual feedback and written recommendations aligned with the county technical assistance and information workshops on how to be a successful applicant in future years. And lastly, funding restrictions should be only limited to state and federal obligations, and the funding should permit flexibility to community-based organizations to adapt their budgets so that they can fulfill the same outcomes they identified in their proposals. That concludes this step, and I pass it over to Cecily.
All right. Our final step is accountability. And for accountability, we have the following recommendations. We recommended, yes, that for funding agreements between organizations and county specific to the grant and include perspectives and feedback of community members served. So we wanted to make sure that evaluation for these agreements will have measures that include perspectives of the community and the community members that it serves, and that the technical assistance that the county offered should meet within the measurement and monitoring plans of those evaluation measures. We also wanted to make sure that reporting structures are responsive to the grant while balancing the oversight of reporting needs. This was huge to us because we just wanted to make sure that people had the time and the expertise and the things that they needed to provide the correct reporting pieces to the county, so we weren't put into a position where it wasn't that we were reporting what we actually needed to report. And I think that's it for accountability.
I think that's it too. Thank you guys so much for presenting, or you all so much for presenting the recommendations. I hope you can get a sense of the spirit of deliberation that went into those recommendations. And now I think it's on us as county government to actually do something with these thoughtful recommendations for changing, again, a process that is as important as how we allocate funding in a way that reflects our professed values. So how do we do that? Here's a little bit of a timeline about next steps here. We obviously are interested now in trying to engage the broader community on these transition plans. Today's presentation is part of that. We are here. We also are going to be hosting a community meeting on January 9th. We've just set the date, 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. We'll do it at Leper Run Community Center, and that'll be an opportunity for, again, a version of our leaders group to talk a little bit about what this process was like from their perspective. And to explain the co-created recommendations. Now, I think one of the things that's really important for us to think about as the board and as county government, obviously it takes a little while to make a big transition like this. And so you can see sort of an envisioned timeline for a first full implementation of a notice of funding available process from advertisement to award, consistent with what the groups recommended. But this is really important. I know that we have an opportunity to implement the principles associated with the recommendations between now and then, to really show that we're doing the work. As I was mentioning earlier about showing credibility and commitment to implementing these ideas. So you can actually start to see this already in some of the things we've taken on when we did the Restorative Justice Notice of Funding Available Award, or the recent Safety Net Notice of Funding Available that I think we might be hearing more from the manager about today for COVID relief. These principles about a transparent and competitive process, applications with low barriers to entry, inviting community-based organizations to define the services that they see needed rather than saying the services that we think as government are needed, and inviting applications. These principles are showing up already, and I think it's going to be really important for us as the board and government to keep demonstrating that even as we transition to a first full formalized NOFA system. So I think our next best chance to reflect that is definitely going to be in the development of the of the fiscal 24 budget during February. That'll be a chance to start talking about the notice of funding available. In the meantime, our county manager's office, Samia and her teammate Amber, working as well with Deputy County Manager Michelle Cowan, and her colleague Elizabeth, who is known to us from a couple of these other NOFAs, are going to be working with this subject matter expert support from the United Way of the National Capital Area to come up with the specifics of the competitive process. So we've got the principles, now where the rubber will meet the road of the actual timeline of materials being posted and that type of thing. And then by the first quarter of the fiscal year, which is to say starting late summer, early fall of next calendar year, that notice of funding available process, our goal is to have that live and out, asking for proposals, again, for community organizations to define the needs and their proposals to use county funding to help meet those needs, and then convening and training up a panel, as the team mentioned, the goal of having a panel that is inclusive of not just subject matter experts and necessary county staff members, but also community members with lived experience, and sending that entire panel together through racial equity training so that they have common language, so that they can work during the Q3 and Q4, which is to say the first half of calendar 2024, to make those recommendations so that the board can vote on the first panel of recommended grants as part of the fiscal 25 budget and allocate thereafter. I hope this will become the new way of doing business in Arlington County. There are a lot of other areas that need to shift and specifics. We also have quite a few county board awards now that are discretionary boards that really should be part of DHS's core mission. So there's also work to transition that into different procurement processes. But I know for all of us on the county board, I think we've long had a desire to be able to make funding decisions in ways that are fair and transparent and equitable. And I'm so grateful to this group for giving us a pathway to do that. I'm going to stop there. That's been a lot of me talking. I will once again emphasize that January 9th, 6:30 to 8:30. We'll be having a community meeting to also field more questions too that community members or organizations may have about this transition or about the principles and their development. And we are also going to aim to stand up a web page as well so people can learn more too. Before we wrap up, let me open the floor if my colleagues have questions or thoughts. To reveal behind the curtains, colleagues have actually already had a chance to see this, but I'm glad to be able to be joined by the group and community today. Ms. Garvey, if you want to take the floor first.
As per usual, I'm not going to get into the specifics because I think this is just great. I find I'm thinking how great it is that we've had chair after chair after chair that has made equity their initiative. And this is the product of years of work. It's like we're not careening off from this, and we're really staying focused on equity, and it's making a huge difference. Thank you, Madam Chair. When you started with Unum, has it been a year or two, and I think we first had Mitch Landrieu here in maybe
That's right.
2020.
I was actually part of the 2020 class of fellows, so here we are in 2022.
Right, and I was chairing, I think. I remember that. All right, good. And then we had other things that kind of seemed to get in the way, but obviously this did not stop. And I'm so glad that you worked with them and brought this here. It's a holistic approach. I also find myself thinking about my days actually a little bit with Peace Corps and foreign aid. And there's that saying, I'm here from the government, and I'm here to help you, and that's supposed to be scary. I realize it's really because what it often means is I'm here from the government, I'm here to tell you what you need. And that's what's happened, and had been a problem in foreign aid for a long, long time, and have finally started to fix that. And obviously, that's been happening locally too. And that sort of was part of what the Arlington Way has sometimes been. I also think the Arlington Way is an amorphous thing that keeps changing, which is good, because we don't want it to stay the same. It also is what people think it is. And I do warn us, we may find a little bit of reaction from this, that this is not the Arlington Way. And we're going to have to figure out ways to bring along everybody and explain that, yeah, it maybe used to be, but it isn't now, and this is going to be better, and here's why. So I think we're going to have work to do with the other part of the community that maybe is usually included. So I could ramble on more. It's really exciting, and it got just kind of little, thoughts keep going ping, 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 ping. And it's just a delightful way to sort of end this year and then start the next year. Thank you, Madam Chair, so much, and thank you to our wonderful workers. It's great to have you here. I remember, Cicely, sitting and talking with you, and you were upset about how we were doing our funding. I think that was about 6 or 8 years ago. So here we are. It takes time. Persistence is a good thing. Thank you so very much. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I share the positive overall thoughts. I think we're probably each in our own way dangerous on this, because I've worked at 3 or 4 national nonprofits, and so I'll skip all the summary of that. But I will say that my interactions with each of you ring in my mind as I'm listening to what we're doing now. And I think this is so the right thing to start, and it won't be all simple. As a matter of fact, it will be complex and complicated, but we have to have a conversation instead of what we've been doing to this point. And so just wanted to reflect that thought, and I can't unhear what you've told me on the phone or via Zoom or in conversations, and I think that is what fuels support for this direction for me.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Dorsey.
Thank you. And thank you, Madam Chair, for persisting in this work, and thank you to our partners for persisting in this work, because I am sure there were many points along the way where frustrations could have called on people to sort of walk away and default to the status quo. And I think that's emblematic of what makes the work of equity and doing things that are people-centered instead of bureaucracy or organization-centered. That's what makes it hard, but that's what also makes it worthwhile, because what you've been able to come up with is getting us to the place where we want to be, where public dollars go to support improvements in the human condition, and making sure that we are actually providing our leverage to actually support what is needed in the community, as opposed to vestiges of what was done in the past or misaligned motives. So really hard to unpack all of that, and I'm grateful for all of you for sticking with it. Because it would have been easy and perhaps even understandable if at some point you had just said, all right, too hard, we'll deal with it later. And I just look forward to helping to support this as it goes to the implementation phase in the fiscal years ahead.
Thank you. And Mr. Carantonis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is truly a milestone. I think, not only gratitude is in order to you for spearheading that and for connecting the dots between, our, I wouldn't call it equity deficits, but definitely equity liabilities over a very, very long time, which has been recognized and worked on by that, which makes it the more and more difficult. And we will have more to talk about how we continue to work on our equity liabilities in other places and in other programs. I find the basic idea that applicants are invited and welcomed to come to us with proposals and with their own grassroots-based definition of needs, a significant departure from what we have done until now. It is very clear to me that this is not a very easy thing because any significant departure cannot be linear. But I thank you for being partners and companions in this journey, and I'm really looking forward on the first round of feedback on January 9th in the first public presentation with practitioners. So thank you so much for that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Cardones. I'm glad you called that out. I think that was really one of the major features. I had the realization anyway, listening to this group deliberate, what that means to actually trust the community to define needs themselves. That was a really powerful takeaway for me. So I'm glad you called that out too. And that you noted that that will be a challenge because any big change is a big challenge. Well, on that note, I just want to conclude by thanking you all again so much. And thank you to Ms. Patel for joining us virtually. Despite what sounds like a few different family needs and other things going on, I think a real sign of, as Mr. Dorsey was saying, the commitment that this whole group has brought. I'm very excited. We will miss barely a beat at all into the new year. We'll see everybody on January 9th. Sislikidis, Saul, Samia, thank you all so much. I'm really excited to continue the work.